Picture a family thousands of years ago packing up everything they own and walking north. Not for a week, not for a season. For generations, slowly, drifting away from the equator, away from the sun that had shaped their bodies for hundreds of thousands of years. Somewhere along that journey, without anyone deciding it, without anyone even noticing it happening in their own lifetime, their descendants' skin started changing. Lighter, generation after generation, until people who once looked nothing alike shared the same ancestors. So what actually causes something as fundamental as skin color to shift over time? The answer involves sunlight, vitamin deficiency, and one nutrient your body genuinely cannot make enough of without help. Let's start with why dark skin existed in the first place, because that's the actual starting point of this story. Every human lineage traces back to Africa, and for the vast majority of our evolutionary history, that meant living directly under intense equatorial sun. Anthropologist Nina Jablonski, who has spent decades studying the evolution of human skin pigmentation, found that dark skin evolved as protection against a specific serious threat: ultraviolet radiation breaking down folate, a nutrient critical for healthy cell division and fetal development. Melanin, the pigment responsible for skin color, acts almost like a built-in sunscreen, blocking UV rays before they can damage folate stores in the body. So dark skin wasn't the default that later needed fixing. It was a precise, well-tuned adaptation for a very specific environment: intense, near-constant sun exposure year-round, which raises the obvious question. If dark skin worked so well, why did it change at all once people started moving? Asterisk, now here's the part nobody talks about. The further you move from the equator, the more that same protective trait becomes a liability. Here's the trade-off nobody notices until it's studied directly. While melanin protects folate, it also blocks the skin's ability to produce vitamin D from sunlight, a process that depends on UV rays penetrating the skin. Near the equator, sunlight is intense enough year-round that even heavily melanated skin still produces sufficient vitamin D. But as populations migrated into higher latitudes, particularly across Europe and northern Asia, sunlight became weaker, more angled, and far less available during long winters. Jablonski's research, published in outlets including the Journal of Human Evolution, found that in these lower UV environments, dark skin actually became a health risk, since it blocked what little UV exposure was available, leading to vitamin D deficiencies linked to rickets, weakened bones, and reduced fertility. So the same trait that once protected people near the equator became, in a completely different environment, a genuine liability. Evolution doesn't hand out permanent solutions. It hands out temporary trade-offs, tuned to wherever you happen to be standing. That explains the pressure. But it doesn't explain how skin color could shift meaningfully within a few thousand years, which is genuinely fast by evolutionary standards. Here's where it gets strange, because the genetics behind this turned out to be shockingly simple and shockingly recent. For a long time, scientists assumed lighter skin evolved gradually over an enormous span of time. Genetic research published in the journal Science in 2014, led by geneticist Ian Mathieson, examining ancient European DNA, found something that upended that assumption. Many Europeans as recently as around 8,000 years ago still carried genes associated with darker skin, and the specific genetic variants responsible for lighter skin in modern Europeans spread and became common much more recently than previously believed, likely within just the last several thousand years. That's an evolutionary blink of an eye. It also means something genuinely strange. A lot of early farmers in Europe, several thousand years after humans first arrived there, still had notably darker skin than most of their descendants do today. Lighter skin wasn't a slow drift. It was a relatively fast, strong selection pressure, driven almost entirely by the specific nutritional math of surviving on low sunlight. But wait, if lighter skin is just about latitude and sunlight, shouldn't everyone at similar latitudes have ended up with similar skin tones? That's not quite what happened. But wait, because some northern populations kept notably darker skin, and that exception reveals something important about how this whole system actually works. The Inuit populations of the Arctic are a striking case. Despite living at extremely high latitudes with very limited sunlight, they retained comparatively darker skin than many other populations at similar latitudes. Researchers, including Jablonski, point to diet as the likely explanation. Traditional Inuit diets, rich in fish and marine mammals, are naturally high in vitamin D, meaning the population never faced the same intense selective pressure toward lighter skin because they were already getting sufficient vitamin D directly through food rather than needing to maximize it through sun exposure. This is the detail that reframes everything. Skin color was never really about latitude directly. It was about whatever combination of sun exposure and diet a population actually needed to maintain enough vitamin D and enough folate simultaneously to survive and reproduce successfully. Change the diet and you change the pressure on the skin. Asterisk, and that's really the thread running through this entire story. A body near the equator does not need lighter skin. It has more sun than it will ever need. A body in the far north does not need darker skin. It barely has enough sun to survive on. A body eating vitamin D directly from the sea does not need to change at all, because the sun was never its only option. Skin color was never a hierarchy. It was a negotiation, region by region, between sunlight and survival, written directly into the body of anyone who stayed long enough for it to matter. Every skin tone alive today is really just a record of exactly how much sun and how much fish, oil, or fortified food a population's ancestors could count on. Asterisk. So what about the exceptions? Because surely not every trait involved is fully explained by sunlight alone, correct? And it's worth being honest about this. Researchers still don't have complete certainty on every gene involved in this process, and other factors, including sexual selection, mate preference influencing which traits became more common, have been proposed by some researchers as a partial contributing factor alongside vitamin D and folate pressures, though this remains more debated and less consistently supported by evidence than the nutritional explanation. Human evolution is rarely explained by one single tidy cause, and skin pigmentation, despite being one of the better understood examples, still has open questions researchers are actively studying. Science doesn't always end in a clean, complete answer. Sometimes the honest ending is, we understand most of this, and we're still working on the rest. So back to that family walking north, generation after generation away from the equatorial sun that had shaped their ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. They weren't becoming a different kind of human. They were doing exactly what every human population has always done, quietly, invisibly adjusting to whatever sun, whatever food, and whatever survival math their specific corner of the planet demanded of them. Every skin tone walking around today is a different chapter of the exact same story, written in a different climate. We were never separate stories. We were the same body, adjusting to different amounts of the same sun.